Welcome back to the TrailBLAZER pod. I'm your host Faye, and each week I bring you stories of Jewish women who are paving bold new paths. This week's guest is Dr. Azi Jankovic. From the depths of silence to the echoes of healing, Azi takes us on a powerful journey through the shadows of mental illness and into the light of self-discovery. She opens up about being diagnosed with depression and bipolar disorder, and the moments that sparked her mission to advocate for mental health. It's a conversation about courage, curiosity, and the power of reclaiming your story. Let's dive in. Welcome to the TrailBLAZER pod. I'm so glad to finally have you on here. I really have been looking forward to this episode for a long time. How are you?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy we persisted through all of the war that held us back from doing this, real reasons.
Yes.
But we're on a mission and we're going to make it happen.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy to be here.
You know what I find fascinating is that I reached out to you before I even knew your book is coming out, and it just happened to be at the same time.
Amazing.
Meant to be. So I want to start the same way you start your book. You talk about literally the first chapter is your big why, as you call it, like the moment that you realize you need to share your story. So can you share that with us today?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Faye, having mental health challenges from the time I was a teen, I kept them a secret. I genuinely believed that if I were to share my struggles, that I would lose friends and lose relationships and lose my job and lose my status in the community and all of those things. But there was one morning that changed everything. And it was about 5 years ago. I was in my kibbutz here in Israel, pushing my baby in the stroller and just enjoying a fairly simple, quiet day when the phone rang. And on the other end of the line was a neighbor of mine, a woman about 10 years older than myself, a mentor, someone who works in making matches.
Oh.
And I thought she was calling about a match. But as soon as I heard the sound of her voice, I knew it was something else. And she had actually called to give me the devastating news that a local young woman, an 18-year-old by the name of Gila Hammer, had died by suicide the day before. And that news stopped me in my tracks. And when she continued and she shared with me that Gila had actually died in the same hospital where I'd been a psychiatric inpatient, in the psychiatric ward of that hospital, this young woman died in the psychiatric unit. In any case, it really created almost a fantasy for me. This what if fantasy. What if I could have met her? What if we crossed paths? What if we had been there together? What would I have said to her? And on one hand, I would have just leveled with her and I would have let her know that I understand that depression and suicidal ideations and real true hopelessness is painful. It is beyond the point of physical pain. It's beyond the point of description. And at the same time, Faye, I would have let her know that she can get through this. And when she does, she will experience so much peace and so much fulfillment that it's indescribable. But I never had that chance.
No.
And I did have the opportunity to meet with her parents who have gone on to do incredible things in the space of mental health. But at the time, I spent about a half a day with them and they shared their entire story with me. Everyone who came in to intervene, the people who were available, the people who weren't available. And I realized that I knew things that they could have benefited from knowing in their endeavor to take care of their daughter. They could have used this information. And I felt in that moment that if I didn't share, it would be a crime.
Wow. I have goosebumps. I feel like sometimes things happen and it's like these little like voices from the universe saying like, hey, reminder, do something. And like so many of us like ignore it. Like we don't listen. It's too scary to listen. And it's just, I find it incredible to talk to you and to the women that come on here and I think that's the whole thing about a trailblazer. Like it's the people that listen to that voice and like go out and do something. And I can't imagine how scary that is because this is for you real vulnerable stuff, right? This is not just like somebody having an idea that they're confident about. This is like real life. And how brave that you actually did that, because I know what happened after and how many people you're impacting. But like that moment, I can't even imagine how terrifying that is.
Yeah, it's true. You mentioned these signs from the universe, signs from God, however you want to
Yeah.
think about that. I had one, a very strong one at that moment, because this mentor, this friend of mine, she was a matchmaker. And she said to me, Ozzy, you should really talk about mental health on your platforms. You have a few followers on social media. Why don't you talk about mental health? But I knew that speaking about a topic doesn't mean much unless you share your personal
Yeah.
experience.
Yes.
And I wanted to do it. And she warned me, she said, if you do this, I'm warning you, it's going to impact your children's matches.
Yes.
And
Oh,
and something about that, on one hand, it was so scary, but at the same time, it almost pushed me in the opposite
yeah.
direction. And I realized this is too important. And listen, it took me time. I did it in stages, but I feel so grateful that I have the knowledge. This is what I've shared in the book and what I'm happy to share here today. Anything and everything, that when we understand what mental health is really based on, we realize that there's nothing wrong with anyone. God does not make mistakes.
There's still a long way to go, I'm sure. But to see people in the Jewish community start to speak up, like I'm just like finally, here I am on a podcast and I have all these women that I watch and I listen to and I talk and I'm like, oh my gosh, finally, like finally people are discussing this.
It's so great. And I think we can really attribute it in a lot of ways to the fact that we now have the knowledge.
Yeah.
We have the understanding. For me, a huge turning point was a few years ago when I started learning about the research on how mental health has a metabolic root.
Mhm.
It's not in the mind. There was nothing ever wrong with my mind. There was something that needed adjusting in my gut and in my physiology.
So interesting.
And also, the other parts, I go into the spirituality and the social component, but knowing that this was metabolic and not mental gave me permission.
Mm.
And I remember when I learned that summer, it's such a powerful summer. I was reading this book about, it's called Brain Energy, about metabolism and mental health. And my husband encouraged me. He said to me, why don't you just finally talk about this diagnosis now that you understand it and you're not ashamed anymore? Just go online and talk about it. And I opened my Instagram live. I was sitting in my car, like really casual. And I just started talking to whoever was listening. A couple people logged on and I thought, okay, I felt this calling, like I had to
Yeah.
do it. He encouraged me, which
That's
was huge for
beautiful.
him because he grew up with a very conventional medical
Mhm.
background. And a few months later, I got confirmation. Someone reached out to me and they said, I want you to know that video talked my friend off the
Wow.
ledge.
Wow.
And this is what I'm saying. Like, it's not that
Wow.
hard to save lives. Like, it's not that hard to get this knowledge, to get this information and share. And I'll tell you, Faye, just today, I was in the community of Ramat Beit Shemesh, which is a very Orthodox community. And I spoke to a group of women. And in a session that was recorded, I had several women raise their hand and talk about their own struggles.
That's so beautiful. It really is that knowledge is power, because also when somebody hears the knowledge, but also a personal story, it makes them feel like, oh, I'm not crazy. Oh, I'm not the only one experiencing this. Oh, she's an example of what I could be if I actually like just sat with this for a little bit, right? And that's what I hope to do with this podcast and sharing stories like yours.
Yeah, you're doing it. I mean, those are really powerful messages. You are not crazy. The
Yes.
first quote in my book is from Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was an eminent psychiatrist,
Love his book.
survivor of Auschwitz,
Love it.
incredible thinker. And this line that he says, an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation. And I think what we can recognize, we need to take a little bit of a step back. We are living in unprecedented, traumatizing times, like just the news we're exposed to.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that we have to develop disorders. It doesn't mean that we have to suffer. We can be strengthened and we can get through this. But a huge piece of that is realizing that there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
You're not crazy.
Yeah. I feel like everyone needs to hear that at some point or multiple points in their life, no matter what, whether it's mental health or not. You're not crazy, like, period. I want to step back a little bit, though, before we go into your whole journey with mental health. Who was Ozzy as a little girl?
I can show you some pictures. When I was little, I was an emotional child, very emotional. I would like cry at Sesame Street when Big Bird went to camp.
That's so cute.
I was artistic and I loved reading and I loved people and books. I used to line up my dolls and play school with my dolls.
Oh.
I think very much inspired by my mom, who was a teacher who was always teaching me such a loving way. And I also had an injury when I was a baby. I write about it in the book. I was injured when I was about 19 months old, and I stuck my foot in a stationary
Mm.
bicycle. And when I went to get a scan, the radiologist at the hospital actually missed it. And I went home with this fracture in my heel bone, and everyone thought I was fine. So I literally lived, for weeks with this experience of pain and wondering, is there something wrong with me?
Oh my gosh.
As essentially like a pre-verbal
Yeah, this is
little
like your
baby,
blueprint, basically.
a blueprint. Yeah, that was a blueprint. And it's something I only realized recently,
Mhm.
how I internalized this message that I was beyond help
Mm.
and that there was something wrong with me and that I was this like unique
Yeah.
situation that nobody could fix, nobody could help. And I did grow up with chronic pain. I had pain really every day of my life. Some nights it would, impair my sleep. And at the same time, I wanted to function. Like I wanted to just be normal, and I tried, and I would play sports where I could. I would always go for like the static position. Like I'd play catcher in softball so I wouldn't have to run around,
Yeah, smart.
or like goalie in soccer. But what's interesting, I'll get to that part later. It was part of how I discovered my healing. It was like this physical,
Mm.
mental connection
Mm.
with the foot. But in any case, that was a big piece of my growing up, like kind of sitting on the side of recess and just
Wow.
observing other kids and taking this bird's eye view and becoming a really deep thinker.
Mhm.
I really retreated into the depths of my mind as an escape, I think, from the pain.
Yeah.
And by the time I was a teenager, I was also the only Jewish girl in my class, maybe one of two in different, at different junctures, learning deeply Jewish values in my home
Yeah.
and in Sunday school and Hebrew school, and then going into this environment where I really felt like an outsider in a lot of ways.
Wow. For me, going through certain things when I was younger, like I learned to shut off completely, like compartmentalize it, put it in a tiny little box in my brain and like never, like lock it and never open it. And what that did for me is like I almost too well can disassociate from situations, even though at this point they're very positive situations. But I'm curious, when you say you went internal, what does that mean for you?
I think I started thinking really deeply about things.
Mm-hmm.
I would be at the school football game and all of my friends would be cheering for the school team. And I would be sitting there looking up at the sky, wondering where it ends. And I would be thinking to myself, like, how silly do I feel cheering for a
Yeah.
team when if I lived on the other side of town, I'd be cheering for the other side? Like,
Oh my
I'd
gosh.
be philosophizing, like
Yes.
trying to make sense,
Yes.
like, why am I here?
Yes.
And it was a very lonely feeling. And, the irony, it's funny. I would go to the Barnes and Nobles to try to, understand like self-development and psychology, mental health. And really one of the only books on the shelf back then was called The Road Less Traveled.
Mm.
And that's what this journey felt like for me in a lot
Wow.
of ways.
Wow. So at 15, you were diagnosed with depression, right? And at 17, you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder. What led up to those diagnoses?
So I think with the depression, it was not having emotional language.
Mm-hmm.
It was feeling like, really, really deep, having these deep questions and being surrounded by kids who were
Yeah.
just focused on really simple things. And,
Yeah.
it's funny because if I had been able to play sports and if I had that adrenaline from the
Mm-hmm.
sports, I think I would have been cheering for the football team.
Right. Right.
Honestly,
That
like,
makes sense.
yeah, but I don't think I got, the exercise that I needed because of this foot situation. I think that the nutrition was, in the 90s, I was very self-conscious. My identity was very much based on being told I was pretty and I wanted to be thin and I wasn't born in like a stickly
Mm-hmm.
body. And so I would starve myself. Essentially, I
Wow.
would eat as, starve myself. It wasn't terrible, but it was,
Not
I'd walk
getting what
around
you needed.
hungry. I would
Yeah.
walk around hungry,
Yeah.
eating, fat-free everything,
Yeah.
fat-free snack bowls, fat-free cottage cheese. And when you don't eat dietary fat, it is very unsatisfying. You're not satiated and your
Yeah.
brain doesn't get the nutrients it needs. So
Yeah.
I think sort of a combination of all of those factors, the social piece and the psychology and the lack of support and the food and the lack of movement. I think that was all really hard for me.
Yeah. So when you got that diagnosis, some people, when they get a diagnosis, it's relieving. And I'm not talking for bipolar specifically, like just in general. Let's say someone gets diagnosed with ADHD and they're like, oh, finally things make sense, right? For me, I was diagnosed with an eating disorder at 16. I'm like, finally, like, I understand what's happening to me. That's my story. But for some people, a diagnosis does the opposite. It puts them in this box, it labels them. What did that do for you?
I internalized a message of sort of helplessness, like there was
Mm,
something wrong with me. And, in a 15-minute meeting after I filled out a quick survey, I was told that I had a chemical imbalance. Somehow someone knew what was happening with the neurotransmitters in my brain
from a survey.
because I filled out a survey. And
Yeah.
it's like, looking back, it's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
And we know since then the chemical imbalance theory has been debunked time and again.
Yeah.
But at the time I believed it. It was like, gosh, I'm different. There really is something wrong with me. And it was hard. It was painful. And at the same time, I was a kid and I wanted to live. And
Yeah.
I just took my Prozac and kept on going. But it really led me, Faye, to making some very bad decisions.
Yeah. It sounds like it was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy because you felt that at like a little kid when that thing happened with your foot. And then now these doctors are telling you, and it's just feeding right back into the narrative that you're different
I'm
and you're
beyond, yeah,
helpless and all that stuff.
yeah, beyond help.
Yeah. I'm going to quote you from the book. You said that you spent years navigating a system that treated symptoms but ignored the whole person. Can you share what that means and what it looked like for you specifically?
Absolutely. So, that first meeting with Dr. Benjamin, who was a very well meaning family doctor, she gave me a prescription for Prozac, which was at the time hailed to be this wonder drug. Meanwhile, it had never been tested on minors. And before I was to be given Prozac, she could have checked my vitamin D levels. She could have talked to me about hormones. I think I'd been put on birth control to regulate my cycles even before that. And
Wow.
for all I know, the depression came about because of that. It's not unnecessarily unrelated.
Right.
So, we were treating this like symptom of depression.
Right.
We could have looked at, nutrition. We could have looked at movement. We could have looked at getting some, social support or
Yeah.
new hobbies or,
Like
any
the
number of
holistic
things. Yeah,
picture.
holistic, really looking. So when I say the whole person, I break it down. I call it the 4 Ps, and it's based on the biopsychosocial model of mental health with a spiritual component added in. So it's physiology is the first P. That's the workings of the body. And then there's psychology, workings of the mind. There's purpose, which is the spiritual component, the sense of purpose and meaning we have in our lives. And then there's people, which is the social aspect. And
I love
all
it.
of those things contribute in one way or another to
Yes.
mental health.
Yeah. Wow. You just said it so beautifully. I read it in the book, but hearing you say it, it just comes alive. So you were hospitalized a couple of times. You said you made some really bad decisions. How did you get out of this like cycle? Like what happened next?
So bad decisions. I mean, I'll just give you a few examples. Like the story everyone loves the most is when I got taken in by the cops. I was 32 years old. I was a mother of 3 young kids and I was going back to school for a doctorate. And instead of quitting my job or cutting back on my hours, or instead of cutting back on my volunteering in the synagogue or hosting less for Shabbat, or carpooling more, I decided to put everybody else first and just pop some Ritalin so I'd no longer need to sleep and no longer need to eat
Oh my
much.
gosh.
And then I could just be on the dean's list and get really good grades in grad school. By the way, you don't need good grades in grad school.
Yeah. No
But
one tells you that.
nobody tells you that. I mean,
Yeah.
I had such a deep sense of unworthiness, Faye, that I was doing it to prove something to myself.
Yes. Yes.
And I hit a wall. I really hit a wall. I was taking so much of that Ritalin and we had a death in the family with a lot of drama surrounding it, which led me to sleeplessness and ultimately led me to feel the need to get away from my home. I went to go stay with a friend. Long story short, I was in her guest room trying to get some rest. I was in the shower. I picked up a glass bottle of oil. I thought it was like hair oil or something. Dropped it and slipped through my fingers. And in the moment that it cracked on the floor was the same moment my husband and my dad had entered my friend's house to come check on me.
Oh my gosh.
So they heard this glass break and my husband called a mental health support hotline. They dispatched, not like a cute little social worker lady, they dispatched 2 really burly police officers
Oh my
who
gosh.
came and they came to the room and they were like knocking on the bathroom door and I'm like in the shower
Oh my
with no
gosh.
clothes. I'm like begging them, just like put some clothes to the door. They hand me a silk dress Okay. Because when you're manic and you're running away from home, all you do is pack silk
Yeah.
dresses. So they pack, so they're like handing me this like silk dress and a like a hair covering. I was like, I very much felt the need to cover my hair with my, snood at the time. And so I put this like sweater hat on and I come out and I'm looking around and my dad and my husband and two police officers. I'm like,
Oh my
am I
God.
going to hell right now? Like, what is going on? And I just started praying silently. Well, listen, praying silently around two LAPD
It sounds like you're
officers
schizophrenic.
is not a good idea. Don't do it. Just pray in your head.
Oh my
So
gosh.
they handcuffed me and they dragged me into a police car.
God.
I had my hands behind my back and my head started itching from the snoot I was wearing, this sweater
God.
hat with wet hair. So I'm like, what do I do here? I'm really flexible. So I realized I could get my arms like down under my legs and back up through. So I'm holding my hands like
Wow.
this. And I'm like doing this. I'm like moving my hair, my
Oh
wet
my
hair. And
God.
then I realized like, I better tell them so I don't get in trouble here. So I knock gently on the window and the police officer looks at me, sees my hands aren't behind my back. And he picks up a walkie-talkie, calls an ambulance.
Oh my God.
And within 2 minutes, I was in an ambulance, my hands like in the handcuffs to a gurney, one to each side of the gurney. And this woman who I'll always remember, she had short, spiky hair. She looked at me and she said, honey, I don't think you need this, but I'm under orders. And she
Wow.
shot me with what I later found out was Haldol, which is like a very, very strong drug that sedates a person automatically.
Oh my God.
And, at the time, like I really just needed a hug. I really needed someone calm to sit with me, someone to help me get whatever I needed to sleep. When someone
Yeah.
is in a manic state, the number one thing that is needed is to regulate their sleep wake cycle.
Yeah.
So, that was a really perfect example of how making bad decisions.
It's like a movie scene.
Yeah. Yeah. It was
Wow.
wild. I woke up in this scary, scary place. Very scary psychiatric institution. I met gang members. I met, my friend, 80-year-old Jewish friend Barry, who's homeless. It was really wild. And, ultimately that came from my deep feeling of unworthiness. I was so afraid of losing friends, of losing, my status in the community if I stopped volunteering. And I wanted to show up for everybody else because I was afraid of losing them.
Yeah.
And instead I lost myself.
I'm sorry, my cat is here.
So
Go ahead.
nice.
When was the moment where you realized like what has to be done for you to like besides, not the medications, not
Yeah. Yeah. So there were a few. I was told over the years by several people who were like very anti-pharma, that I
Okay.
was hurting myself, I was killing myself,
Hmm.
but I was afraid to listen to them because I was afraid of having, more episodes. I've since learned that there is not that direct connection that people think. Some people have episodes because they actually go off of their meds too fast. In any case, a turning point for me, the last time I was in an institution was in the summer of 2022. And when I got out, I said to myself, like, this is it. Like, my number one
Okay.
goal right now is just staying stable. And with all of that being said, a year and 2 months later, October 7th happened. And I live in
Wow.
Israel. And I was tapering off of my meds and I was, I learned so much about mental health and I was speaking out and I was like
Yeah.
just starting my advocacy work when October 7th happened.
Wow.
I was already writing my book. And when it happened, I just called the psychiatrist, called my therapist, called my functional medicine doctor, like called everybody. And I started taking drugs to sleep because I was so afraid. For me, sleep is like my magic
Yeah.
variable, I call it. And I was so afraid that if I didn't take those drugs,
Hmm.
I would end up again, like
Yeah.
back in that, yeah, locked up. I have 4 kids at home. I have a husband. I have a community. Like I love my life. I didn't
Yeah.
want that to happen. So I did start taking these drugs again. And for a little while they worked. But as, anti-anxiety meds and antipsychotics often do, they started having these side effects for me. Rebound anxiety during the day, for example. I would feel more anxious after weeks and months went by. My tolerance went up. I was unable to get off of it. I became very, very anxious right around the spring before Iran was attacked us for the first time.
Hmm.
After October, I was like really trying to keep it together. I went on the ketogenic diet. I was trying these drugs. I was trying so many different things. And as the Iran attack got closer, my anxiety just went up and up and up. And I remember the morning after the attack, and we woke up and like the sky hadn't fallen. And I felt like we had gone through the parting of the Red Sea. I mean, I was like, I felt like I woke up to this incredible miracle, which it really was that, there were 300
Yeah.
missiles launched straight at us. And with the help of God and in the countries who are our allies, we made it. And I just said to myself, like, first of all, I gotta get out of here. I planned a trip and I went over to Crete, which is a quick flight away. I went with my family. First of all, trip planning is therapy. Just scrolling through those
Yeah.
gorgeous pictures of the beaches is so much better than scrolling through news.
Yes.
So right away, like I had this benefit of
Yeah.
just, my dreams changed within a day. I was dreaming of pink sand beaches
Mm.
instead of having nightmares. And then I got there and I sat and just looked at the beach from this little villa that we had, our little Airbnb. Just sat there and I reflected. I was like, what do I need to implement so that I can feel better? Because I just wasted months worrying about something
Yeah.
that never happened. I
So
can't do
many
that
of us
again.
do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't do that again. And I know that Iran's going to come back. And I know that,
Mm.
I live in Israel. This ain't over
Right.
till it's over.
Yes.
So I committed myself at that point to really keeping with my anti-inflammation protocol, nutrition that I write about in the book. And also I committed to 90 minutes of movement every day.
Mm.
I got a tracker for the movement. And I also really committed myself to going to sleep earlier to get that deep restorative sleep that's so good for
Yes.
mental health. And just those three pieces like really, really strengthened me. And layer by layer, I've added to that. I've gotten stronger. It's made a tremendous impact on my life, my mental health. And I just decided, you know what? This is a long war. This started October 7th and there are many layers to it. And no matter what's happening around me, I need to focus on being as strong as I possibly can.
Wow. And then now look at like what happened the past 2 weeks, and I read your post that like you have the tools to deal with stuff like this now, right? So like so interesting to hear what it was like in the beginning and like that journey for you and how you got to the place you are right now.
Thank God. It's interesting that a lot of people talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, like
Mm.
a disorder people develop. But the truth is that there's something called post-traumatic growth that's
Mm.
not often talked about.
Mm.
And I look around myself, my own experience. And I also have, friends here and people who I know who've had these moments of clarity that, I can't control everything going on
Yeah.
in the world around me, but I can control certain things.
Wow.
And this growth and this meaning and this purpose that has stemmed from so much tragedy and trauma,
Yeah.
it's really incredible to behold.
Yeah. Your healing journey has kind of led to this framework that you created, the Echo method. Am I saying it
Yeah,
correctly?
echo.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I wanted to really lead with education. I'm an educator by background, and I believe that knowledge is power. And if I had had this book when I was
Yes.
15 or when I was 17, I could have saved myself 97% of the struggles.
Yeah.
So the Echo method is about how do we go about change? A lot of people fear change, but change is also very exciting
Mm-hmm.
because the truth is our bodies are complete miracles, changing every single second and adjusting according to the inputs that we give it.
Yes.
And so the Echo method, it's education, curiosity, healing, and observation. So it's very much like around the scientific method.
Mm-hmm.
First, you get the information, the facts, you learn the concepts. What is this change that I'm about to make? So let's just take the movement, for example. For me, it was I'm implementing X amount of minutes of daily movement. And I learned about the different types of movement, which ones are going to give me the greatest
Mm.
benefit for my brain, the greatest benefit for my body. And those are the ones that, that I took upon myself. Could also look like, getting an instructor or a trainer or,
Yeah.
following along with videos, just having that education, that information to get you started. The curiosity is rather than thinking to myself, oh, this is going to be so hard or dreading it or like anticipating pain. It's being curious. What if I even enjoy this? Like, what
Yeah.
if I meet new people along the way? What if I have an enjoyable experience? What is
Yeah.
this going to add to my life? What might this feel like? And really opening yourself up to the possibilities. The healing is experiencing whatever transpires from that intervention that you're putting in place. And then the O is observing, does this add to my life?
Mm.
Does this add to my well-being? Or is this something that I want to set aside and let go of and move on to something else?
I love that the O part because I think sometimes we forget that we can also change our mind and figure out, okay, just because I put so much time and effort into this doesn't mean that it's benefiting me now. Sometimes it does for a while and then we build up a tolerance or we need something different. But I think a lot of us forget that part. Like you can try and pivot and try again and find what works for you.
Yes, absolutely. It's like writing in pencil,
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know?
good. I like that. I like that metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to quote you again. I love quoting my guests. You wrote this and I also I love how you write so vulnerably on I mostly follow you on LinkedIn, some on Instagram, but I'm on LinkedIn a lot more. And you wrote, "I know what it feels like to be completely miserable, to genuinely wish I didn't exist." So I want to kind of speak to the audience now. If somebody is listening right now and is feeling this way, what advice would you give them?
First of all, I see you, I hear you, and it's painful. It's really painful. And as much as this might be difficult to hear, I want you to know that the deeper the depths of your suffering, the greater the heights of your recovery.
Wow, that's beautiful. Despite like mental health diagnoses being so common and more people talking about it, I feel like it's still pretty stigmatized. Like people are still afraid of saying certain things. Why do you think that is? And like, what can we do about it?
Yeah, I actually blame most of the mental health organizations. The
Mm,
mainstream mental health
interesting.
organizations create stigmas. I'll give you an
Okay.
example. NAMI, NAMI, is a huge mental health organization. They get hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. They perpetuate this number, this
Mm,
1 in 5 people will get a mental health diagnosis. 1 in 5 people struggle with mental health.
yeah.
What does that mean? When you peel back the layers, it actually means that 1 in 5 people will go through the symptoms that are correlated with that diagnosis within any given year. So after 5 years, what does that mean? It means
Right.
basically everybody is
Yeah.
eligible for some kind of diagnosis.
Yeah.
Would anybody want to be the 1 in 5 to stand up and say, hey, I have this disorder? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be 1 in 5. They could very easily come out and say 20% of people will experience these symptoms in a year, but they don't say it like that.
Right. Right.
They say it in a way that perpetuates a stigma. They also say stop the stigma. Well, when a ginormous organization is saying stop a stigma, what are they doing? They're reinforcing the fact that there is one. So let's just put all that
Mm-hmm.
aside for a moment and realize when we actually understand what mental health is, it's not the 170 some odd labels that are in some book that some, group of mental health professionals who get paid a lot of money per hour to write these,
Yeah.
codes on a piece of paper and hand out drugs. It's not that. It's so much more than that. And I'm not saying that someone can't be helped within, it is very nuanced. There are some psychiatrists and some therapists that I certainly respect. I'm actually developing a network of allied mental health
Wow.
professionals where we really see eye to eye on these things. But those are the people who will help you fix what you're eating for breakfast so you feel
Yeah.
better before you have to take a pill that's never been studied long term.
Yeah. I think like we're not taught how to do our own research, right? Like just because somebody that is a medical professional, like they have this title, tells you something, doesn't mean that this is the fact and the fact for you. And I think a lot of us are like scared to, I know even for myself, like when I was younger, I'm learning now, but like why would I ever doubt a doctor? They know what they're doing.
Exactly.
And like, you're allowed to get a second opinion, you're allowed to get a third opinion, you're allowed to do your independent research, but I feel like we're just not taught that skill.
Absolutely. And it's funny because at the age of 17, when I landed on this psychiatrist couch for the very first time, I had come back from an international flight. I'd gone to Europe and then Israel. And on that flight, I started having massive foot pain.
Mhm.
And from the foot pain, I couldn't sleep. The Advil wasn't working. The melatonin wasn't working. And I just kept missing sleep. And any normal human being who's exposed to sleep deprivation,
Yeah.
any human being who is on SSRIs, and any human being who experiments with psychedelic drugs and cannabis, pretty intensely, like I had been doing as a senior in high school,
Yeah.
is going to be prone to mania. And so instead of bringing up those risk factors, the psychiatrist just took one look at me and he gave me this label this disorder for life and told me that I would need drugs for life. Meanwhile, these
Yeah.
drugs had never been studied long term and they'd never been studied on children. So looking back at that whole episode, I really think it's a crime that so many people are given this reductionistic approach to what they're going through when, that same psychiatrist could have just sat me down and held my hand and just talked me through my day and,
Yeah.
how to calm down and how to feel safe and how to get deep sleep. There's so many things.
Yeah.
And yeah, the information now, Faye, we're so blessed. It's all at our fingertips and
Yeah.
everyone can be a researcher. You do not need a degree. You do not need a high school diploma. You don't need anything
Yeah.
to do this research. It's
Yes.
all here for you.
You can become your own expert, basically.
Yeah. The CEO of your mental health.
Yes, yes, exactly. If you were to put this in one sentence, what's your goal with this book?
My goal with this book is to add life to people's years and to add years to people's lives.
Oh my God, so poetic. So you're talking a lot to listeners and people who are listening who are potentially dealing with this, know someone who's dealing with this, and they can really like internalize this and maybe make a change that they wouldn't have otherwise. But looking back, what would you now say to 17-year-old Azi?
Oh my gosh. I would just makes me want to cry. I would just let her know that life is only going to get better.
Oh,
And, right now, girl, you're stuck in this structure. You're stuck in, as a child in the home of adults. You're going to leave. You're going to create your own life. You're going to fly. You're going to find your people and, people who want to talk about things that interest you and who care about things that you care about. And you're going to find a way to feel good. And it's not your fault.
That's an important one. Wow. I really personally want to thank you for the work that you're doing. You're so inspiring. And the way you also, even your voice, the way you're sharing it is just so honest and calm. And you have such a beautiful presence. So thank you for that.
So sweet. Thank you
No,
so
I really mean
much. It really touches my heart.
I truly mean that. I end off the podcast by asking everyone the same question, which is, what does being a trailblazer mean to you?
Being a trailblazer means listening to that small, still voice in your heart and realizing that there really is no evil in life other than the evil that is self-doubt.
Wow.
And if you can put that aside and you can have a look at it and you can have a talk with it and ultimately you can let it go, you can go anywhere.
Love it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.